Hello, everybody, and welcome to Warrior Goddess Wednesday. I am your host, Rachel Z, and welcome to the podcast/show. So, on Wednesdays, I like to go over different warrior goddesses, and not just warrior goddesses, goddesses from all different cultures and stories from throughout the world. And the reason being is that I am working on my own comic book / science fiction fantasy series called The Dragon Warriors. And in this book, each of the Dragon Warriors, the ladies who are my best friends saving the multiverse, each have a guardian goddess. So in this sense, there are lessons that are provided by these different aspects, different energy signatures. So to some degree, they're all warrior goddesses as it comes to offering levels of protection, guidance, and strength to all of us from the stories that we can wield from them. And today is a very special day because I'm doing a little Sailor Moon thing. We have a full moon coming up tomorrow. I'm going to do a quick reading of the chart of the everlasting now, which I like to start the show with, just because it helps to ground us as to where we are in time, space, and the cosmos, as well as we're going to then go into the sun goddesses. We're also going to look at sun gods as well, because typically the sun as a symbol is a masculine sign, right? We think of solstice, we think of the sun as being a masculine attribute. However, it's good to provide nuance to meanings and mythology by looking at numerous other cultures that look at the sun deity as a female aspect. So we're going to take a look at the female aspects first, notably the Japanese goddess of the sun. And if you look at Japan's flag, they do the idea of the red sun. And I was looking at stuff in terms of Phoenix because I did my reading last night, my comic book reading as Jean Grey, and she also deals with the Phoenix. And there is a really interesting mythology behind Krypton, behind Flamebird and Nightwing, and the different, they're like dragon gods, and Flamebird is actually a unique dragon / Phoenix. So more to come on that mythology, but today is going to be about sun goddesses / some gods to add some context to the meanings behind the sun. Because we also use the sun is a very important part of your birth chart, right? So let's go into that. Sorry about the clearing of the throat situation. I'll have like perfectly fine voice for most of the day, having all my conversations, but then when I need to film something, here we go, or stream something. All right, so this is the chart of the moment, what I fondly like to call the chart of the everlasting now. And you can see that the sun looks like this glyph here, where it's like an egg with a little dot in the center of it. It's like the potential of all creation. And typically when you are looking at your horoscope, when you have your birthday, Kevin tuned me into the whole idea of like Prince and that quote of like, you don't celebrate birthdays, you're born once, you have a return. So the sun returns to the place when you were born. You may have moved location wise, but so you're never going to have that exact same time space moment, but the sun is in typically the same spot of when you were born. So we are currently in Gemini season. I'm just going to take a look at the planets right here just to get some guidance. We have the sun is 2 degrees in Gemini. The moon is currently in Scorpio. That is a very intense moon we have going on right now. The full moon, when we have it tomorrow, will be in Sagittarius. When you have a full moon, that's typically when the sun and the moon oppose each other. So they're close here, but not quite yet. Scorpio full moons come with it. Scorpio rules the 8th house, which is also the occult, the underworld. I like to call the 12th house underworld too, but both 12th house and 8th house deal with a lot of invisible, unseen territory. And Scorpio moons mean that our emotions are very much tied to that unseen realm at this moment. As well, we have Venus. Let's see what else is going on with our planets. Mercury is in Taurus. Not retrograding. Venus is in Taurus. We also have Mars in Aries. Jupiter is in Taurus. So Jupiter is coming close to getting out of Taurus. And so that's huge because Jupiter takes a year to go through the sign. So if you were born with Jupiter in Taurus, it's going to leave that. And where is it going to move? Is it going to go into Gemini? I don't know what the path of Jupiter is as well. So that's important to note too with your own birth chart, that each of the planets has their own unique orbit around the sun. And so we also have to think of astrology as a way of looking, to me at least, when you're looking up at the sky, it's like a map of existence or a map of time space imprinted. And so it just gives you some navigation tools to like see where you are in terms of that and where you are in the story, and some guidance as it comes to certain decisions. Let's see. Uranus is in Taurus. Neptune is in Pisces. Pluto is retrograding in Aquarius. So it'll be back in Aquarius for quite a while now, I think. That's huge, actually, if we think about it. Pluto in Aquarius, I like to look at generations as where Pluto sits in a generation. Just because the themes that Pluto brings within that, because Pluto takes such a long time for it to enter and exit signs, I think that those born under Pluto's transit or where Pluto is at that time will be imprinted with intense energies that are similar. I say that as a Pluto and Scorpio generation person, and I feel like those of us born under that have very little in common with what's typically known as millennial. And the dudes who created those things, the generations, were just guys who like wrote some book, I feel like in the 60s. So I feel like we can expand upon that verbiage, that those terms, just to be a little bit more granular about it, because I don't feel like the generations, that doesn't do us any services of like blanketing big groups of people into things like that based on that. I would say even by decade, if you're born in a decade, I think that has more, you have more in common with those than that. Like, I was made in the 80s, so there you go. All right, so that is the chart at the moment. We're going to now go into the sun goddesses, which is the topic of today's Warrior Goddess Wednesday focus. I love the sun. I am a complete sun worshiper. If we look at actually learning moment as it comes to astrology, your signature sign, if we think of your rising sign here, so if a baby was born at this chart when I ran it, they would be a Capricorn rising. Now, what we want to look at as your signature sign, this is a good example. Pluto is the first sign to enter the chart. So Pluto sits in this individual's, if this person was born right now, first house. So the signature sign of this person would then be, where is it? Scorpio. Oh my gosh, I don't know why, because the ruler of Pluto, or rather Pluto rules Scorpio. Now the signature sign, there's a couple of other ways. I think another way of looking at it is if you look at all of the aspects of all of the planets and all of the modalities, like fixed, mutable, cardinal, and then you interface that with fire, earth, wind, water, you'll have a kind of flavor that is of a particular sign, right? Like fixed earth is Taurus, fixed fire is Leo. But in this case, I like to look at signature sign as the first planet that enters the chart to make the entrance. So whatever first planet comes in through here, sometimes you'll have planets a little bit closer to the rising sign that are kind of clumped together. And then the ruler, whatever house or sign that this planet rules, gives you your signature sign. Where was I going with this? Yes, my signature sign is Leo, because the sun is the first planet that enters my chart after the rising sign. So I feel a lot of, and I mean, I love Supergirl too, and Supergirl gets her powers all from the radiation from specifically our yellow sun. It's why when she goes on that mission, you know, to find out who really killed Krypton, you can get that reading off of my channel as well. But she like powers up her suit, her special suit, so that she can take more solar energy with her out into space, because she doesn't know if she's going to have the radiation from a yellow sun out there. So our sun is very special also because it's our main source of energy here, and there are many stories about the sun. In Greek and Roman literature, as well as Egyptian. There's tons of myths around it, but not as many deal with the sun as being a goddess. So we're going to look at goddesses, like sun goddesses first, and then I'm just going to tap into some sun gods, and then we're going to talk about, oh my gosh, I'm going to mispronounce this, Heliopolis, or the city of the sun, because that's also relating this to Phoenix and the idea of rising from the ashes. And if we look at the chart right now, this whole like Pluto hanging out here, there's a lot of like underworld going through the underworld energy right now. And there's a lot to be learned from the story of the Phoenix, who willingly goes into full destruction in order to rise again, and not to fear it, but instead to embrace it, so that a new you can form. And I also found out that phoenixes are, like, carry an egg that's their father. They basically like rebirth their father. It's just an interesting, or mother, if you want to look at it that way as well. So something to note. Okay, so we're going to look at Amaterasu. Oh my gosh, I hope I said that right. Amaterasu. I'm going to go with it. Say it quickly and hopefully poetically. Amaterasu is the great and glorious goddess of the sun. An embodiment of the rising sun and Japan itself, she is the queen of the kami and ruler of the universe. The Japanese imperial family claims to have descended from her, and this is what gives them the divine right to rule Japan. She is the center of Shinto and Japanese spiritual life. Oh, so that's like that she's a big deal, and I guess in Japan. And it's also like I have kind of like my semi Sailor Moon outfit going on right now, and there is no Sailor Sun, right? Because that's venerated as like a separate deity all on her own. Amaterasu can be translated as shines from heaven, with this glyph meaning, or Japanese character meaning heaven or imperial. I didn't know that that is kind of an equivalency, heaven and imperial. I always thought of imperial, I guess not to confuse with empire. Good to have nuance in these kinds of terms. So good to know. And then this symbol means shines. Amaterasu is shorthand for Amaterasu Omikami, which can be represented in kanji as this. This longer version means the great and glorious kami who illuminates from heaven. The most prominent of her titles is the great sun of the kami. Okay, so Queen of Heaven. And the kami and creation itself. And although she did not create the universe, this is good to note, she is the goddess of creation, a role she inherited from her father, Izanagi, who now defends the world from the land of the dead. And this is kind of similar to what we will find out about certain sun deities and their relationship to death, because this idea that the sun is reborn every day in the morning and dies every night. And we too, in our own cycles of life, need to recognize that, and that includes the bigger cycle of life and death. And so, goddess of the rising sun. Amaterasu's primary role is that of the sun goddess. In this position, she not only serves as the literal rising sun that illuminates all things, but also provides nourishment to all living creatures and marks the orderly movement of day into night. The sun represents order and purity, two of Shinto's most important concepts. All things in creation are ordered from Amaterasu down to the denizens of Jigoku, and other hells, and this order is reflected in Japanese society as well. I suppose, to some degree, many of these myths and stories, and I've watched a few animes and certain movies that talk about sometimes these stories can be used to control people, right? So this can sometimes be used as a way to justify a hierarchy in a society, like why some are more worthy than others, right? So the Japanese royalty deems itself fit to rule due to their lineage as coming from the sun goddess. I forget what other, there's another dragon goddess, who marries a human mortal, and like that's another imperial family as well. And I didn't know that imperial is also kind of equivalent to heaven, and that's interesting. I was also, when Kevin found Knights of the Zodiac for me, and in looking into that manga, Knights of the Zodiac are also known as Saints of the Zodiac. And if you look at Saint George as also being a Knight of the Round Table, there's some interesting connections there between the translations between different cultures and stories as well. So that intrigues me, because I'm going to start on this show to make a little map of all of our goddess friends, the sisters, I call them, all sisters and aspects of the same, and tying that all together. So I'm not going to get into more of this. This is more into specifically Amaterasu. I think there's a story. I find that with the sun, actually, let's get into more of the sun gods and goddesses first, and then I'll give my opinion on the personality of the sun, which I can relate to as well. Being very solar, even though like I love the moon, right? But I love them in different ways, as we all have our own relationships with each of these luminaries. Okay, so we have Horus, and I believe this is going to be Apollo here. Apollo was one of my favorite gods growing up. For whatever reason, I always thought he was like hot, Okay, so let's see here. The sun is our brightest celestial object. Its fiery brilliance an absolute necessity for life. Indeed, it is little surprise, therefore, that sun deities constantly rank high in divine pantheons, if not considered leaders of the gods themselves. So, sometimes considered a creator god, sometimes ranking high, but never considered. They're not always the leader either, right? The sun. Okay. With the sun both able to nurture and destroy life, many sun goddesses and gods possess warlike aspects. Apollo, for example, is envisioned as graceful and beautiful. However, should he choose to, his golden arrows can effortlessly decimate an entire city. Who decimated the Troy had a bunch of that too. So the thing about the movie Troy as well is that they completely cut out the fact that these heroes are champions of the gods, and so the gods themselves are also going through a cosmic battle that is mirrored through the actions of their heroes in the Battle of Troy. So they kind of cut out that magical part of it and made it be like it's over here. But I forget, like they desecrated the sun god's temple. I think Troy was considered venerated Apollo. Please correct me if I'm incorrect about that. But I think that that's correct. I'll check later. So let's see here. So they're saying a notable exception to the above is the Japanese Amaterasu, which I talked about just earlier. Benevolent and peaceful, almost fragile to the unfamiliar, she is a stark contrast to sun gods from the Near East and the West. Her core myths seem to reiterate her delicateness. She is almost depicted as vulnerable in the face of her vigilant brother, the impetuous storm god Susanoo. So I think that there's a story here too about how the sun goes into hiding, and let me go back here because I'm going to tell a story, a sun god story, and that's going to go into like personality types in terms of how we personify these deities in some sort of way. Actually, let me see if there's another. There are other sun goddesses. I swear there must be, because the Norse goddess Sol, she is also female, and she is said to be let's see, Mexico, we have Aztecs, ancient China, ancient Egypt, Ra, of course. I'm looking specifically for sun goddesses, but I know Norse mythology specifically, I'm going to go back to the main screen here, but Norse mythology specifically has a sun goddess Sol, and she is said to be devoured by a wolf. I think that's what ends up happening, and that's how we end up with darkness. And she also fights in Ragnarok. And it's just interesting, too, that in reading the history of the entire Marvel universe, how much of modern myth in comic books is couched within real myth. And just like there's many different versions of these stories, just like there's many different universes in comic books, so they can all coexist with each other depending on which universe you're in and what story you're reading at the time. Now, go and bring this back to the sun goddesses. I was just finishing up this book I have on Egyptian mythology, and I was reading a story about Horus, the son of Osiris and Isis, also known as the sun falcon. And Horus can sometimes be conflated with Ra, the sun god. So there's a relationship there as well. And just like Hathor and Isis, where there's sometimes equivalencies and sometimes the mother, daughter, sometimes wife, mother. So like these things get conflated with each other, but mainly because these entities, these gods and goddesses, are encompassing many ineffable, inconceivable concepts. So they're holding all of that within a persona. So where is I going with this? Yes, there's a story about Ra. So Horus wants to get his throne back, right? Because Set did a dirty and like killed his father Osiris and usurped the throne. And so you would think that with Horus making his appearance and being like, hey, this is my rightful birthright, give me back the throne, you think that it would just be easy for that to happen. But unfortunately, not so much. They need to go through all of like the proper legal proceedings, I suppose, to prove Horus's legitimacy and his right to rule, right? Now, what happens here is like a lesson I'm taking to learn from Isis, because there's a council of 3, Thoth. I love Thoth. So Thoth, Ra, and I think Geb, who's the earth god in this. And so Egyptian culture is cool too, because in this sense, they have their, so usually you think of like an earth goddess and a father sky, like Uranus and Gaia. But in this case, it's flipped, where Geb is the earth and Nut is the sky. And so Ra is sensitive. And this relates to the delicateness of the Japanese sun goddess, where I believe there's like a story of Ra goes into hiding, and to get him out, actually first I should explain why he went to hide in the first place and finish the whole thing with Horus, because Isis made a little bit of a mistake. She made a presumption, because Thoth was like, yeah girl, I have your back. We all know that Horus is like the rightful heir to the throne, so this should be easy as pie for you to get the throne back. So Isis was like really excited. She's like, yay, like all the wrong things will be made right. My husband will have justice, even though he's just ruling in the dead. So she sent a message to Osiris in the Duat, in the land of the dead, to tell him that your son is going to rule Egypt. You know, finally we get a win, yay. But she did this before speaking with Ra. So I don't know if like she just thought because like Thoth agreed, and if it was a council of 3 of, let's like Thoth, Geb, and Ra, that like, oh, that's like a shoo-in. But Ra was like, oh my gosh, you didn't consult me. So Ra's very sensitive. It's known that like he gets his feelings hurt very easily if you don't like venerate him properly or like enough, or if like he's not a favorite of yours or anything like that. So because of that, he like goes into hiding into some cave. And I think there's another story, like I believe it's the Japanese mythology, I need to double check on it, but another sun goddess, she goes and hides in a cave. And to get him out of the cave and out of hiding, Hathor, and I think the equivalency is Aphrodite, or like the goddess of like love and joy and jubilation and all of that kind of fun stuff, she like shows her genitals to him in like a teasing, jovial kind of tone, like yeah, like a striptease, but like funny, like just to make him laugh, just for a laugh, right? And because she does this, Ra's like, oh, okay, I'm in a better mood. So he comes out of his cave and he's like, all right, fine, I'll listen to you. So they still go through this whole proceeding since Horus still has to make his case, and they have to, like, I think they have to make this boat. And anyways, they go through these trials. But regardless, the sun god and goddess, there is this aspect of sensitivity and duality, in the sense of like the absence of, we feel the absence of the sun. And so in our own selves, as we are having, you know, our solar returns, and we are mapping most of our lives to like an age based on that sun, but it's important to also not to be entrapped in that time and realize that we too can regenerate and reinvent ourselves, much like the sun comes down into the darkness, so it can come back full force. It can't just be day all the time, because that's not good either. Okay, so last thing I want to talk about before we wrap out. I went a little bit longer than I thought I would. One sec, I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any. Okay, perfect. I wanted to talk about the city of the sun. Helios. And because there's like the new Egypt Heliopolis, and then the previous one. I'm going to look at the Old Kingdom, because that's where the sun cult hung out. It's good to know this kind of stuff, because I do have the Knights of the Sun in my comic book. So this idea of veneration of a sun, or perhaps a sun goddess, is something to note, right? So Heliopolis, one of the most ancient Egyptian cities and the seat of worship of the sun god Re. So see these like equivalencies, Re, Ra. It was the capital of the 15th nome of Lower Egypt. So it was a religious rather than a political center. And there's a new city of Heliopolis, which is named after this old city, but the old city used to sit in, like, if you were to go to that old ancient site, it's in Cairo. And it's because little remains today of this great ancient Egyptian city. The sole surviving monument is the obelisk of Sesostris I. It's the oldest obelisk in existence. A peak of okay. So this is like, because remember, obelisks are meant to be like that phallic symbol up into the sky, and it's a way of, I suppose, like, yeah, if the sun's a goddess, then perhaps that's much of like piercing it. Yeah. Let me think on that symbolically. But let's see here. Of the pair of obelisks erected by Thutmose in Heliopolis, now known as Cleopatra's Needles, one stands on the Thames embankment in London and the other in Central Park in New York City. So, time to go see this obelisk. Okay, I thought there'd be more on that there. I wanted to look at the old map of it. So yeah, that's the obelisk. Yeah, and like, it's so trippy. And then how Egypt looks. It's kind of crazy how the Nile looks like the Milky Way. Craziness. All right, so let me see if I can find. See, this is all that's really left of it. The remains of Heliopolis. I wanted to find a rendition of what it perhaps looked like back in the day. Another thing to note with suns is that the symbology of the sun is that oracles are typically related to suns. Like, you think of the Oracle of Delphi, they're looking at Apollo and beseeching Apollo for I guess, a way to see into the future. And I think it's because if you think about being able to predict the fact the sun will always be reborn, that's a level of being able to recognize where you are in a story, so being able to forecast and foreshadow, knowing certain aspects of like what kind of story it is and how what beats would end up falling where. And I'm sure Apollo would agree with me, being a god of art as well, fine art. That's why Apollo and Venus get along, and it's a great way, I think, looking at myth to understand astrology. And so, because you can kind of think of, if we just want to finish off with that, I think that's a good way to do it. If we think of you having your own birth chart just like this, and if you would like for me to do your a chart reading for you, it won't be using this calculator, it'd be one that's much more in depth. Would go into your own specific lineup of what these different planetary rulers are doing and how they are playing out different storylines, like what is opposing each other, what is interacting with each other, and what different elements and modalities are most active in your starseed blueprint. So with that, I hope that we take a look at the sun with a little bit more respect every morning, perhaps with a little bit more veneration and understanding of the light that brings light and balance to the universe, and realize that like there is a dance that happens within the cosmos that we are also not a part from, but rather a deeply integrated part of. So I welcome you to look into more of these sun gods and goddess stories, as well as the city of the sun. And if anyone can find renditions, like ancient artist renditions of what the ancient site of the city of the sunshine would look like, please get at me. But if you like this content, please make sure to give it a like, share, and subscribe. And I will catch all of you for this content next week for Warrior Goddess Wednesday. I haven't decided what type of goddess we'll be looking at next week. I wanted to do wife goddess energy, but I've already done that. But I haven't really done more of a deep dive into Hathor. And I think some of the goddesses that end up being equivalencies in multiple stories, and a way of mapping them out in a way of decoding different symbolic meanings. So stay tuned of what that'll kind of look like. And if you have any specific goddesses that you would like for me to take a look at and their stories, I would love to hear from you. So have a great evening, my starseeds, and until then, stay magical. I'll catch all of you next time.